What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Next Pats podcast. I'm Phil Perry coming at you from Henderson, Nevada, which is home to the Raiders football headquarters here. You've heard Bill Belichick call them the Taj Mahal of football facilities. You've heard him call this place magnificent, using terminology that we've very rarely, if ever, heard from Bill Belichick before. But the place is spectacular. I'm in the media workroom right now. It's been a great week here watching the Patriots practice. They practiced solo Monday, joint practices on Tuesday and Wednesday. I'm going to give you a quick overview of what we saw here, and we'll do a little stock up, stock down based on the proceedings here over 2 days of joint practices. We'll get into specifically how Mac Jones looked and the one characteristic that Jones has shown, in my opinion, that we don't talk about enough. We'll also have a tremendous interview for you this week because we're talking to Bruce Feldman of Fox Sports and The Athletic. His annual Freaks list of college football athletic specimens came out recently, and we love having Bruce on to chat about that list and talk about the best of the best when it comes to college prospects, because that's really what these guys have become. They're not just incredible athletes. It's the fact that their athleticism pretty frequently leads to them being among the best players in college football. We talk about that. We talk about those trends that he's noticed over the years and years that he has put this list together. And I think it's great to have Bruce on, especially for people who like listening to this podcast and love the draft content. They love looking ahead and wondering what might be next for a team that is going to make some really important decisions next year as to how it will look long term. We can get into some of that. But if you're interested in all that, this will be a great interview for you to digest. But first, let's get into some of our camp takeaways. Number one, I thought Wednesday's practice, so day 2 of Patriots Raiders joint practices, was the most enthusiastic offensive workout that we've seen maybe all summer from the Patriots. Certainly since the very first practice of training camp, where the pads weren't on yet, and the Patriots offense was whooping it up because they were lighting up their opponents on the Patriots defensive sidelines. That was a day that was a practice-long party for Mac Jones and his teammates. Celebrations left and right, pumping up the crowd, explosive plays, touchdowns from Devontae Parker. It was fireworks for about 2.5 hours. But we haven't seen that kind of excitement since then. You've heard it here. You've heard it on the Patriots Talk podcast. You've watched our shows. Hopefully you've read some of our articles too. It's been an up and down training camp. And depending on the week, it's been mostly down at times. But Wednesday felt like a party for the Patriots offense. For the vast majority of practice, I would say. Was it perfect? No. They started slow again. But they nipped those initial practice pains in the bud very quickly. So that first series of 11-on-11s on Wednesday went something like this. Blown up tunnel screen, RPO for no gain, sack, timeout at the line of scrimmage just to get organized, incompletion on 3rd down, and then on 4th down in a gotta-have-it situation, Chandler Jones sack off of Trent Brown. So that's the first period of 11-on-11. And we're looking at it, if you listen to the Patriots Talk podcast yesterday, where we detailed Tuesday's practice and how it looked for the Patriots offense, and it was rough. We're sitting there thinking, might be another rough go 2 days in a row for Bill Belichick's offense. But they bounced back big time. Touchdown to Jacoby Myers in the next 11-on-11 period in the red zone. Then in the hurry-up period that they put together, they get into field goal range, 46-yard field goal from Nick Folk. Okay, fine. Not perfect. Not in the end zone, but still momentum moving in the right direction. Next period, Mac Jones goes 4 for 4 with touchdown passes to both Jacoby Myers and Ty Montgomery. The Jacoby Myers touchdown was a beauty. Really, both of Myers' touchdowns on Wednesday. Really accurate passes. One over the shoulder to Myers in the back corner of the end zone. One more of a 50-50 type ball where Myers elevates and high points the thing for a score. Then he hits Ty Montgomery in the flat for another touchdown. After all of these, Mac Jones is seeking out whoever has caught these scores, and you're seeing high fives, you're seeing flying hip bumps, you're seeing all kinds of joyous reactions. And those are normal during training camp for an offense that's performing well. But it had been such a slog for multiple weeks, and there was so much for them to iron out, and they knew it. Everybody knew it. Then at the end of practice, as was the case on Tuesday, in the 2-minute period, the Patriots did everything they wanted to do again. Mac Jones goes 4 for 5, and with 4 seconds left from the 9-yard line, this was the situation as they had structured it. You start basically at their own, I believe it was 35, with just under 2 minutes left. That's their 2-minute drill, no timeouts. And so you drive the field. He completed 3 passes. The Raiders actually called timeout at one point with the clock already stopped so that they could reset after seeing what the Patriots brought to the line of scrimmage. With 4 seconds left, they're down 5 points, so you have to put it in the end zone. This was going to be the last play, and Mac Jones has time in the pocket. We'll talk about the offensive line a little bit, but he has time in the pocket, rips a strike to Hunter Henry over the middle of the field, touchdown. Henry jumps up, spikes the football, and there's a big celebration in the end zone with everybody who's on the field from the Patriots offense. And that was as exuberant as Mac Jones was really all practice. So I think there are 2 things worth pointing out here. Number one, just to see the morale for Patriots players on that side of the ball to be where it was different. Really, since the pads have come on, we have not seen that. And so on August 24th, that to me, and yes, I'll read into body language all day long. Sometimes it's all we've got. It's not all we had today. It's not all we've had all summer, but I think it can tell us quite a bit sometimes. When you see that level of excitement and enthusiasm, they're feeling good about how things are going. And those moments have been few and far between. And so today, August 24th, 2022, maybe it ends up being a watershed moment for this Patriots offense. I don't know. But that leads me to my next takeaway from today's practice, which is the resiliency that the Patriots showed and that the Patriots offense specifically showed. Because for about 80% of Tuesday's practice, it was among their worst practices of the summer on that side of the ball until a 2-minute drill sort of salvaged the day in some ways. But you bounce back 24 hours later and you have one of your best offensive practices of the summer. And to me, I think you're helped by your quarterback in a big way in that regard. And that leads me to the characteristic that I don't think we talk enough about when it comes to Mac Jones, and that's grit. Yep. Grit. We laugh about it when we bring that word up in sports conversations because it's become an overused cliche, and it seems to come up quite a bit when we talk about Patriots slot receivers, and it's become a running joke. I'm not sure it's being helped, that word, by the fact that it's painted on the walls of the team meeting room in Detroit with Dan Campbell about the length of the wall. And that's what they want to be about. I actually love this season of Hard Knocks. I really enjoy watching Dan Campbell. I'm not sure it's helping grit catch on unless the Detroit Lions have an amazing season. But it's this concept, it's this theory that firmness of mind and spirit, that's what Merriam-Webster's dictionary tells us grit means. I think that's something that Mac Jones has shown really since he's a rookie. We talked about it last summer. If he had a bad practice period, oftentimes he bounced back pretty quickly with a good one. Finish practice on a low note, he would come back the next day and look like a different player. I think even during the season last season, he showed that he had this quality. He got lit up through the first month plus of last season because Trent Brown goes down injured early. The offensive line is shaken up. They really can't protect him. He's on a record-setting pace in terms of the number of hits that he was scheduled to take over the course of a 16-game season. Never mind a 17-game season, which is what last year was, obviously. And yet, once they figured things out on the offensive line, first of all, he didn't miss time. Then they figure things out on the offensive line, and he goes on a tear through the middle portion of the season. So this is something that I think matters as we look at Mac Jones's, not only the arc of his young career, but his potential. And I think grit is something that will help him immensely, specifically this season, as the team and the offense and the coaching staff goes through this change, which is significant. And it hasn't looked good at times. It oftentimes hasn't looked good. If you have a quarterback who doesn't have as much of what we're talking about, does the season get off the rails before it even starts? I think that's a real question. Based on what we saw these last 2 days of practice, where you have a horrible stretch on Tuesday and you finish strong with a 2-minute drill, and then you have a rough blip early on Wednesday, but finish strong with several solid periods as the practice goes on. We're seeing that this thing is not being derailed. Now, can they continue to stack these days, as they put it? Can they build on this momentum that maybe they've established here in Vegas? We'll see. That's why I say maybe this ends up being a watershed moment for this Patriots offense. But it's progress. And to me, it's been driven by the quarterback. And so Mac Jones, he leads our stock up category for today, as we're discussing sort of big picture what went on here in Vegas these last 2 days of practice. On Wednesday specifically, he went 19 for 22 in 11 on 11 periods with 3 plays that I counted as quote unquote sacks. If you want to include the 7 on 7 work that he had to, 23 for 28. Pretty good day. Now, it was not as explosive as maybe the first practice against the Carolina Panthers was, where I remember downfield completions to Devontae Parker, a long defensive pass interference to Nelson Aguilar that day. But this was more of a traditional Patriots offense, chip away at the opposing defense kind of day. So a lot of short throws to Ramondre Stevenson, screens to Jacoby Myers, but the 2 touchdown passes to Jacoby Myers were tremendous. I thought the pass to Hunter Henry for the touchdown at the end of practice, also excellent. And there weren't as many opportunities to maybe go deep down the field because, number one, a significant chunk of Wednesday's practice was focused on the red zone. You're also looking at the 2-minute drill where you're not necessarily looking at shot plays. You're trying to move the offense down the field to get into position to score. It's the end of the game. You really can't turn it over or you've lost. And so some of those higher risk throws down the field aren't often a focus. And so when the focus is the 2-minute, it makes sense that we wouldn't see those kinds of explosive attempts. So that part of what we didn't see from the Patriots offense wouldn't bother me. I thought it was a really good day for Mac Jones. He deserves to be in the stock up category. I'm putting Jalen Mills in the stock up category, even though after Tuesday he was stocked down. He went 0 for 3 in his one-on-one reps against Davante Adams. On Tuesday, he comes back Wednesday, first one-on-one rep of the day. He's the first guy up against Davante Adams. And what does he do? He bats away a pass from Derek Carr in the red zone. He ends up winning his other 2 reps against 2 different receivers. Tyron Johnson and Keelan Cole were the others that he locked down. But Jalen Mills, another guy, he'll grit there. Perseverance. Tough day yesterday. Comes back 24 hours later, ends up having a good practice. So Jalen Mills is also stock up. I've got Jacoby Myers and Devontae Parker in my stock up category. Now, Parker was not as busy on Wednesday as he was on Tuesday, but on Tuesday, I thought he was really one of their only highlight players of the day. I'm also putting Matt Judon in my stock up category because he continuously puts together these practices where he has a play or two where you say, oh, sacked by Judon. He batted a pass today immediately after having a sack. He had what I thought would have been 2 sacks in the 2-minute drill against the Raiders on Tuesday. So he just continues to play effectively up front after such a poor finish to his season last season. I wondered what kind of Judon we might see, but he looks healthy. He looks disruptive, and they're going to need him to be both of those things, because on the other side, on the other edge, while I think there are some promising players, Josh Uche, it looked like was relatively disruptive again today at times, had him down for a pressure. He would have had a sack on Tuesday on a snap where Judon drew a hold, and they ended up calling that hold and enforcing it. But there's not a whole lot known on the edge opposite Judon. But he's moving into 2022, it looks like, picking up from where he left off, I would say, in the middle of last season when he was arguably the team's MVP and one of the best edge rushers in the league. He's looked the part this summer. Okay, stock down. We're going to talk a little bit of injury here because Damian Harris had to leave Wednesday's practice, and we did not see him again about midway through the practice. Not a great sign because 2 other players also left. Isaiah Wynn and Nelson Aguilar, they eventually at least came back to the sideline, though they did not jump into practice after the fact. We saw both Isaiah Wynn and Nelson Aguilar after practice. We talked to Aguilar. He said he actually would be ready to play Friday in the preseason game if his number's called. We'll see on that front. I also ran into Isaiah Wynn after practice, asked him how he was feeling. He declined to comment. So we'll see if he's available on Friday. But given that he missed all of last week's practices against the Panthers and then missed that preseason game, the fact that he was at all limited here in Vegas is an issue. So something to monitor moving forward. But I think you have to put both players in the stock down category. I had Harris stock down after Tuesday's work before he was hurt because they continue to try to use him in passing situations, and I just don't see that looking all that smooth. You do see every once in a while an incompletion sent in Harris's direction, and then a long conversation between Mac Jones and Harris a little bit later on when they're on the sidelines. I think they would like for him to be able to contribute in that regard, and we have seen him catch the football before. I just don't think it's something that has consistently worked this summer. And we saw a couple of moments where it just looked clunky, Harris in the passing game here in Vegas. So you put those two things together, the unfortunate part, the injury, the passing game part, to me, we'll put him in the stock down category here on this podcast. With Wynn, he had a tough test on his hands before he got hurt, but he did allow what would have been, in my opinion, and what looked like a sack to Max Crosby. Great player, no shame in that, but for him to have to leave practice again, given his recent injury history, never mind his long-term injury history, we'll have him in the stock down category as well. All right, so you got your stock up, your stock down, you got your grit conversation with Mac Jones, you got your details on Wednesday's practice. We've got more, though. We've got more here for you. And right now we're going to get to our interview with Bruce Feldman. Phenomenal stuff, again, from this Freaks list. As always, so many names for us to consider. We even got some local guys on the list this year, highlighted by Jacob Dobbs, linebacker out of Holy Cross out in Worcester. 9% body fat, okay? 6 feet, 235 pounds, 365-pound power clean, 36.5-inch vertical, 4.65 laser 40. Pro shuttle is right around 4 seconds flat. I mean, really impressive stuff. Clocked well over 22 miles an hour in a game last year. I mean, man, 6 feet, 235 pounds. If you're used to Patriots linebackers, you may think that's undersized. It's not anymore. Guys that they have now, Mac Wilson, I think is a great example of an athletic 230-ish pound linebacker. So somebody we need to keep an eye on. Number 44 on Bruce's Freaks list. We'll talk about one very high-profile local player on Bruce's list. I'll give you a little bit of a rundown on a couple others, but we want to leave some meat on the bone so that you go check this thing out yourselves if you haven't already. All right, without further ado, let's get to our conversation with the great Bruce Feldman. All right, there he is, Bruce Feldman. We're very excited to have him with us now, especially in the aftermath of his annual Freaks List release on The Athletic. Bruce, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me. It's good to talk some football this time of year.
Definitely. We were just saying offline, what's nice about the Freaks List every year when it comes out this time of year, you know football's close, whether it's college football, the NFL, high school. For those of our listeners that might be a little bit younger, it's exciting nonetheless, regardless of the level you're talking about. And the first thing I guess I wanted to ask you, Bruce, was because, you know, we are a draft focused podcast here from the New England end of things. And the Patriots have really, it looks like at least, gone out of their way to draft athletes early the last few years. They get Cole Strange, which surprised a lot of people in the first round this year, but he's a great athlete, even though he's coming from a smaller level competition. You know, you talk about Tyquan Thornton running a 4.2. Marcus Jones is a great athlete. A few years ago, Kyle Duggar,
yeah,
is a freaky
Duggar
guy
was
himself.
My first non-FBS guy I think I ever had on the list.
And it seems like there's been a little run on non-FBS guys that maybe we can get into that. But I'm just curious, have you noticed in the years that you've done this list that trends in the draft have changed where teams are focused more on the traits and they feel like maybe they can coach those traits into quality NFL production? Because at least, again, from a Patriots point of view, it has looked that way.
Yeah, I don't know if it backs it up more than anecdotally, you know, because this was obviously, you go back to like the great Steeler teams of the 70s, and you had, you know, Joe Green, even, you know, Terry Bradshaw was Louisiana Tech, you know, obviously John Stallworth. You had a bunch of guys, you know, Jack Lambert, you know, you had guys who were not at, you know, the biggest schools, the traditional powerhouses, and they had a lot of success. I think Donnie Shell, same thing, you know, so for every Franco Harris and Jack Ham at Penn State. So I don't know if it's just like, if it feels that way or not. I know personally for myself, probably in the last like 6 or 7 years is when I, as a sideline reporter, being out on the field in the pregame, I would always have NFL scouts come up to me and talk to me about the Freaks List. And it kind of initially blew me away. I was like, wow, these people were in the business, actually really pay attention. And then because of that, I would have more and more conversations with them. And that started to kind of like open up my eyes to more guys who maybe I didn't know about, go at this time of year, and would go talk to coaches at their schools who would give me information. Not always guys who would fit, but some of those guys definitely, for a variety of reasons, ended up off the radar programs, but they're not off the NFL's radar.
It's just so interesting because, you know, it does, again, from a Patriots point of view, it looks like it matters. But even, you know, just looking at your list from last year, Bruce, I think 7 of the top 10 freaks on your list, and this is well before these guys' final collegiate seasons, so who knows, you know, how that ends up for them. But 7 of those 10 guys end up being first round picks. And who knows, you know, what this year's list will turn into. But it's no surprise that the guys that you end up highlighting end up becoming coveted players at the next level.
Yeah, I mean, look, I didn't, sometimes I don't keep track of, oh, I had this many players from this school in the top 5. And this year, my top guy, Mozzie Smith, the defensive lineman from Michigan, I didn't realize that I remembered certainly Aiden Hutchinson. I knew he was in my top 3. He was number 2 last year. I had Kwity Paye, who obviously Patriots fans know, you know, Rhode Island product and everything else. And even before that, another guy from the Northeast, Rashawn Gary, was a top guy for me. But, you know, they all had kind of different paths there. Whereas like Rashawn Gary was the biggest, you know, recruit coming out of high school that year. Aiden, second generation guy. But then like Kwity Paye was, you know, a little more under the radar in Rhode Island, and Mozzie Smith as well. And it's just the one thing you kind of see is a lot of times those guys who are, you know, at the top of our freaks list or near the top, you know, they back it up. You know, when it comes to the draft process, you know, it's very rare where I've had somebody that high up and then they go there and it's like, wait a minute, this guy ran like, he's supposed to be a 4.45 guy. He ran 4.75, or he's supposed to, you know, vertical jump 39 inches and he vertical jump 31. And a lot of times they exceed it. So, I mean, Aiden Hutchinson matched all his numbers. You know, we've had a lot of guys who've exceeded them. Tariq Woolen was a cornerback out of UTSA who nobody had heard of, I think, till we had him on there. And he did ridiculous stuff when he got to the combine in India, for a 6'4" corner or whatever, So, I mean, that's been the fun part, to see it validated in the draft process.
Yeah, and Woolen looks like now he might have a real role for the Seahawks early in his career here. So it's just the fact that you have all of these numbers again about a year before there are 6 months before these guys do their pre-draft testing. It speaks to the quality of the information that you're getting. And I know you just talk to so many people and you spend so much time on this, Bruce. It's one of the reasons why it's such a treat for football fans. I think one of the other reasons it's a treat for football fans is because throughout every year, you do get some very interesting types of athleticism included in the list. And some of them are a little weird. And some of them are things that, I would never, even envision. But when you think about it, you think, okay, that is impressive. And that probably could translate onto the field. What was the weirdest feat of athleticism in this year's bunch?
The Mozzie Smith, like the video I was able to get this year, and some of it came from Michigan, so Michigan, like obviously there's the combine stuff, which most diehard football fans know, broad jump, the different drills, the shuttles and everything. But some schools have really unique tests that they do. And Michigan has a couple of them, but one of them is the reactive plyo staircase. And they say staircase, but the stairs are probably almost like double the steepness. I don't even know if steepness is the right word, that we would probably have in our house or in an office we work in. And when you see this 300, almost 340-pound man just pogoing up this 7 stairs in a ridiculous pace, I mean, it's something that they have guys 100 pounds lighter doing. And it's one thing for them to tell me about it. It's another thing to actually physically see it. The video of him, they have something called a combo twist machine. And they said it's basically, it's something geared towards getting guys to see, how they would respond in the trenches. And they had to contract out, they called their manufacturer, said, we need more room to pack weights on this because we got a guy who it doesn't accommodate. And they're like, no, you don't need it. And then they went to another manufacturer to specifically make these additions on it so they could pack on another 200 pounds for Mozzie Smith. And so if people haven't read this story, I would encourage you for this, if for no other reason than this, go look at the video of Mozzie Smith on the combo twist and watch him, but then look at it again and watch the guys next to him and their faces in disbelief and awe. These are Michigan players who are seeing what this guy is doing with a ridiculous amount of force and power. And if you see the other athletes look in disbelief and awe, I think that's the definition of a freak.
And Michigan is just loaded with some unbelievably freaky guys. And so when you see the reaction of his teammates there, I'm sure it speaks volumes. There's another Michigan guy that had a really interesting backstory. He's German, ankle flexion, I guess.
Champion mogul skier. Yeah. So I don't know if there's some UMass fans on here, but Brandon Collier is a former Don Brown defensive lineman at UMass.
Okay.
And he's really the foremost European super scout. And he has brought over a lot of guys from Europe and some from now Africa to play college football. And one of the guys, I've known him for a long time. One of the first guys he really touted was Julius Welchoff, who was a former champion mogul skier, could walk on his hands for 50 yards, do backflips on skis. And he's, came over, he was 6'6", 225. Now he's, almost 6'7", almost 270 pounds. And so his shuttle times, and that was the biggest thing, in terms of the measurables that Aiden Hutchinson really jumped off the charts on, had shuttle times like a defensive back. Welchoff is right there with that. But when I asked DJ Turner, who's the fastest player in the Michigan program, he's a cornerback, I said, what's the most amazing thing you've seen him do? And he goes, we do an ankle flexion test. And he goes, most guys usually get like 12 or 13 inches. I said, what'd you get? He goes, 15. I said, what did he get? He goes like 23 or 24. And to know that big of a gap, it goes from one, and obviously DJ Turner is not me or you. He's a guy who is going to run arguably the fastest shuttle maybe in the history of the combine. Like, he's an elite athlete. And for him to say, yeah, this guy's like twice the number I have or almost, he was just like, what he does doesn't even make sense to me.
So all the parents out there listening, if you want your kids to have unbelievable ankle flexion, I guess it's mogul skiing.
Mogul
That's what they've got
skiing,
to
yeah,
get
get out
into.
there and go at it hard for a long time.
Well, and from a Patriots point of view, again, like that's a position, Bruce, where we could see the Patriots dipping into, and that's a school that they've dipped into many times before, Michigan. So that's part of the reason I think our listeners, if they haven't read your freaks list already, I think they'd be interested in it. There's another guy, one more guy I did want to ask you about specifically, and he's an Army guy. So I don't know if Bill Belichick, famed Navy person with an extensive history of being around that Navy program, will be all in on Andre Carter. But it seems like, based on the discipline that somebody who has to be an elite athlete at a program like that must possess, along with all of the freaky traits that he has, I think the Patriots and just about every other team in football will be interested in this guy come the draft.
I agree. He's got a lot of length. I mean, he's 6'7", 260, but has a 6'10" wingspan. They told me that they timed him this offseason in the pro agility test at 4'2". For that size, anything, as you know, under 4'5" is really moving. They said his reactive and processing times are the best in the program. Also, ultra productive player this past year. Came there as like a 2-star tight end prospect, had done prep school in Connecticut, and is really, he's a great story. And I think for draft people, I think he's a really interesting prospect. Obviously, Ali Villanueva turned out to be probably a better NFL player than he was even at Army, because he bounced around positions. He was a tight end. At one point, he was a receiver. And obviously, he had a really good run with the Steelers as a left tackle. Another guy who I just, sometimes guys are late bloomers, and I think Andre fits in that category. And you're getting a guy from West Point who's been there, where, I mean, some of the guys I talked to on that staff were so effusive in talking about how special they think he is.
Yeah, Cheshire Academy's own Andre Carter II. So somebody for us to keep an eye on as this college football season gets underway here. Bruce, thank you so much for spending some time with us. Your piece, this freaks list, there's just so much meat on the bone every year for those of us that are interested in the draft and in all these workout numbers and what it might mean, not only for their college football seasons, but for their pro potential as players. So thanks for putting all the work that you do into that list every year. And thanks for being with us here on Next Pats.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I look forward to talking to you again.
Awesome stuff from Bruce there. Could talk to him about that list for hours, just about every year. But we hit on some key names there. Mazi Smith, the defensive tackle from Michigan. You heard him say he's almost 340 pounds. Bill Belichick does still like those space-eating nose tackles in the middle of the field coming from Michigan. That will help. The athleticism that he has shown, that will help as well. He is a rare human. Mazi Smith is, at his size and with his movement skills. You heard us mention Julius Welskoff, also from Michigan, an edge defender there, big-bodied guy. I think there is a little bit of movement on the edge defender front in terms of what the Patriots are looking for there. I think we're going to see a lot of 4-down defensive lines for the Patriots in 2022, with Matt Judon on one edge and Dietrich Wise on the other. Henry Anderson has seen a lot of time on the edge. I'm not sure we are going to see guys like Josh Uche or Ronnie Perkins become 3-down players anytime soon. Remember, Matt Judon's closer to 260 pounds, whereas Uche and Perkins are 10, 15 pounds lighter than that. So they still will use those lighter guys in the subspecialty situations on 3rd down, but they still, I think, will be looking for big edge defenders. So Welskoff is a name we need to remember. Andre Carter from Army is a name we need to remember. I think DJ Johnson from Oregon, who's way up Bruce's list this year, was a tight end, outside linebacker, defensive end, 275 pounds, clocked 23 miles an hour on the GPS. I mean, that is incredibly rare. I'll give you 2 more names at a couple of other positions that I think should be of interest to the Patriots moving forward. I think receiver is going to be back on the list come next draft. I know they look really deep there, but both Jacoby Myers and Nelson Aguilar are not under contract after 2022. So listen, you could go into next year with what I think, based on what we've seen in training camp, would be a pretty good receiver room with Devontae Parker, Tyquan Thornton in year 2, and Kendrick Bourne. Now, Bourne has had a disappointing camp, but I still think the guy can play, clearly, based on what he showed last year. Maybe it's just going to take some time for him this year with the new offense and trying to figure his way out in that deeper receiver room. But I still think you'd like to be 4 deep there. So if neither Myers nor Aguilar is really back, and if Trey Nixon doesn't turn into the guy that we here at Next Pats think he could be, friend of the podcast, Trey Nixon, how about Andre Yoshivas from Princeton? He's out of Hawaii, and he is an unbelievable athlete, a track athlete. And so he's going to go to the combine and light it up because he already does a lot of those things that they ask him to do there. When he finishes his season at Princeton, he's not going to have to get used to those drills the way so many athletes do. And so many of them get very good at those in a very short period of time. And a lot of them, believe me, are training in those events before pre-draft prep, but he's been doing it for a long, long time. Legitimate track athlete. And he's smart too. And that is something that I think the Patriots really value at that position, because even if they are changing their offense, and hopefully we'll get more details on what that means for receivers, but for a long, long time here in New England, it's helped to be smart at that position because there are so many different options and variations of routes that you could run depending on the situation, depending on the defensive looks. So he's coming from a lower level competition in the Ivy League there, probably not seeing a whole lot of exotic stuff defensively. But if he can pick it up, combine that with his elite athleticism, again, he's way up the list coming from Princeton for a reason for Bruce. He's somebody that I would be really interested in, Andre Yoshivas. And then the only tackle, I believe, the only offensive tackle in the top 25 for Bruce this year is somebody named Trevor Reed from Louisville. Junior college guy, but has the ability at 315 pounds to do backflips, 52-inch box jumps, according to Bruce. And the man can move. And if you look up his height, weight, speed, some similarities to Teron Armstead, who just got paid by the Miami Dolphins despite having all kinds of injury issues. He came from a much lower level competition. I believe it was Arkansas Pine Bluffs. If I have that, if I remembered that, that was right off the dome, friends. If I remembered that, then there is just a wide range of useless information that is rattling around in my brain right now when it comes to people in their college football careers as it pertains to drafts past. But I believe that's where Teron Armstead was from. He ended up going in the 3rd round, I believe. Trevor Reed, if he's all the way up this list and he's the athlete we think he is, I would expect at that position as a left tackle, he's going to go much higher than that. So that's a position that I would be looking at for the Patriots. And that's a name I would keep an eye out for them as well, because they obviously like their athletes at tackle. Everybody does. There's only so many. And so Trevor Reed is a name I'd be looking at for the Patriots as well. But we are a long way from the draft. So you got a bunch of names there. And there's more we could hit on. There's a Red Sox draft pick, a former Red Sox draft pick in the mix for Bruce this year. There's a Holy Cross player. There's a Harvard guy named Thor that you're going to have to check out. BJ Wilson is from Quincy University. When I first read it, I thought it was, I said to myself, Quincy College has a football team now? And if you're from the greater Boston area, you probably know somebody that went to Quincy College. I said, boy, times have changed. I'm just up the street. I didn't realize they play football. They don't. It's Quincy University. And this guy's name is BJ Wilson. He's another tackle, computer science guy, 3.4 GPA, smart human being, 6'7", 320, really good athlete. Quincy University. Who'da thunk? Never heard of it. Not sure any of you have as well. But there it is, BJ Wilson. Anyway, a lot of fun going through that list every year, and we appreciate Bruce's time. All right, that's it for this edition of the Next Pats podcast. Thanks for listening. Make sure you tune in to our next Patriots Talk podcast, which will be coming at you very, very soon. We will have more of an overall look at where this Patriots team is right now as they head into their preseason finale. Keep an eye out for our Next Pats podcast next week. After the preseason finale, we will give you our 53-man roster projection. The Patriots have to get down from 80 all the way to 53 in the near future here. So who are the tough cuts? Who are some of the surprising adds that we may have on that list? We know you love hearing about some of these under-the-radar players that are on the Patriots roster here on this podcast. So we will have, I think, a handful of those that end up making the team right out of the chutes. But we'll get into all of that next week. Make sure you keep an eye out for it. Thanks for listening this time around. We'll talk to you very soon.